Historic legislation to allow voluntary assisted dying will be introduced into State Parliament next week. The Premier says the issue is beyond politics and MPs from both major parties will be allowed to vote with their conscience when the bill is debated in September. Here's State political reporter Rachel Rieger.
The choice for dying Queenslanders to end their life on their terms is a step closer.
The time is right. And Queenslanders have spoken. They have raised this issue with me.
The draft laws by the Queensland Law Reform Commission are designed to limit the suffering of those with 12 months to live.
This is such an important piece of legislation. This is such a historic reform.
This is not about suicide. This is about voluntary assisted dying. It must be voluntary without coercion. It is assisted by health professionals and the person must be dying.
The Premier says the issue is deeply personal and all government MPs will have a conscience vote.
Having seen firsthand the suffering of both my grandmother and my uncle, it is heartbreaking and no one wants to see that.
Opposition MPs will also be allowed to vote based on their beliefs.
There are passionate views on both sides of it, and we owe it to everybody to study the legislation in detail.
Voluntary assisted dying is only accessible in Victoria at the moment. It's also legal in Western Australia and Tasmania, but they're still implementing the scheme. Proposed laws are still going through South Australia's Parliament, and a bill is likely to be introduced in New South Wales later this year. In Queensland, after the legislation is introduced into Parliament, it will then go to the Health Committee for a 12-week consultation period. The bill will then be debated and voted on in September. If passed, it will take 15 months to implement, meaning Queenslanders won't have access to voluntary assisted dying until at least 2023. The laws have already polarised debate.
There'll be not one extra death in Queensland as a result of the passing of these laws. But the end of life will be much more humane.
It is a form of killing. It is an assisted suicide bill. It will lead to wrongful deaths. There's no doubt about that.
More than $170 million will also be poured into palliative care over 6 years, but more support is needed.
We've really recognised that it's nowhere near enough to actually touch the surface of the challenge in this space.
Rachel Rieger, ABC News, Brisbane.
So how would voluntary assisted dying work? This is the essence of what the Law Reform Commission proposes. It must be voluntary, so no evidence of coercion. It must be assisted, so the medical profession has a role here. The patient either administers the substance themselves or a doctor or nurse does it for them if they're unable. And the person must already be dying in intolerable pain from a disease or illness that is expected to kill them within 12 months. 2 doctors must rule on this, independently and separately. This is an important ethical Rubicon we could cross here, sanctioning putting someone to death that is being overridden by the principle of patient autonomy. As such, it's critical that the patient has decision-making capacity and be an adult that is at least 18. There are also mechanisms that slow the process for the purpose of reflection. The request and assessment would require 3 separate requests that are clear and documented, and there must be at least 9 days between the first and last request. The person must also be told more than once that they can pull out at any point. What about the medical professionals? Do they have to take part? Well, no. Any doctor or nurse with a conscientious objection will have the right to choose not to be involved. And overseeing all this will be a new board to ensure the law is complied with.